You grow up in Harlan County, Kentucky, in a house where the television is always on and the government is always trusted. Not politically, not in the flag-waving bumper sticker way, just structurally, the way you trust the water company. The government is a thing that exists above the weather and below God, and it occasionally asks something of your family, and your family gives it. Your grandfather gave it 3 years in Korea. Your father gave it 14 months in Vietnam and came home with a hearing problem in his left ear and a relationship with silence that his wife spent 30 years trying to understand. Your father doesn't talk about what he did over there. He talks about the men he did it with. Those men are the only currency he trusts completely. Everything else, money, politics, the VA, the pension he was promised and received in partial installments that required 4 appeals and a congressman's office to unlock. Everything else is subject to negotiation. The men are not. You grow up understanding that the only institution worth belonging to is the one made of people who would carry you out. You enlist at 18 because the coal jobs are gone and the scholarship didn't cover everything, and because, if you're being honest, you want to do the thing your father did in a way that he can be proud of without the part that broke him. You want to be the version of the soldier the country tells itself it makes: disciplined, purposeful, effective. You want the sacrifice to mean something clear. Your father drives you to the recruiting station in Harlan and shakes your hand in the parking lot. He doesn't say, "Be careful." He says, "Come back whole." You don't ask what he means. You think you know. You go to Fort Benning. You complete Ranger School on your first attempt, which puts you in the company of approximately 49% of candidates who don't wash out. You are not the fastest or the strongest in your class. You are the most accurate. Your marksmanship scores are in the 97th percentile. Your land navigation scores are perfect. Your evaluating officer writes in your file that you have a quality he calls operational patience, the ability to remain motionless and invisible and unrushed for exactly as long as a situation requires. He says most men have a physical limit on stillness. You don't appear to have one. You deploy to Iraq in 2004. Fallujah, which is a word that by then has stopped meaning a city and started meaning a condition. You spend 14 months running direct action missions in an environment where the intelligence is unreliable, the rules of engagement change with the news cycle, and the men you are hunting have access to the same cellular networks as the men you are trying to protect. You are excellent at the work. You are not confused about what the work costs. You file that in the same drawer where your father filed Vietnam. Not resolved, not unresolved, just stored where it can't interfere with the task in front of you. On a Tuesday in March of your second tour, 3 weeks before your scheduled rotation home, a man sits down across from you in the forward operating base's recreation room while you're eating lunch. He is not in uniform. Khaki pants, a collared shirt, the kind of nondescript middle-aged presentation that reads as deliberately unreadable. He introduces himself by a first name only. He does not show credentials. He says he's been watching your file for 8 months, and he'd like to talk about what happens after the Army. You ask who he works for. He considers the question with the patience of a man who has been asked it many times and has a preferred answer. He says he works for an office that conducts a function the government needs performed but cannot officially sanction. He says the office has no budget line in any public document, no presence on any organizational chart, no acronym, no address. It exists the way a shadow exists, as a consequence of something else being in the light. The something else is the official apparatus. The shadow is what the official apparatus needs done when it can't afford to be seen doing it. He slides a single sheet of paper across the table. It's not a contract, it's a number. $180,000 per year. Tax-free, deposited quarterly into an account structure he will explain at a later meeting. Your current E5 Ranger salary is $35,000. The difference is $145,000, more than 4 years of your current pay, annually, for as long as your performance warrants the arrangement. He doesn't say the word arrangement like it's unusual. He says it the way an HR director says benefits package. You ask what the work is. He says the work is the same as what you do now, except the geography changes more often. The deniability is structural rather than procedural, and the end states are defined by people who are not generals. You ask who defines them. He says people whose names you'll learn when you need to know them, and not before. He stands up, leaves a phone number on the table, and thanks you for your time the way a man thanks a waiter. Not dismissive, just clean, like the transaction is already complete and he's just waiting for you to catch up. You go home for 3 weeks. You eat your mother's cooking. You sit on the back porch with your father and watch the hills go dark. He asks if you're re-enlisting. You say you're considering a different kind of work. He nods. He doesn't ask what kind. Your father spent 14 months in a country he wasn't supposed to be in, doing things that don't appear in any official record of that conflict. He knows that when a man says different kind of work in a certain tone of voice, the question behind the question isn't one you're allowed to answer. You call the number on the 4th day. The onboarding is not what you expect. There is no headquarters, no badge, no official swearing-in ceremony, no official designation connecting you to any agency or department in the United States government. There is a 3-week orientation at a property outside Charlottesville, a farmhouse with good sightlines and a basement converted into a workspace. 4 other people in your cohort. You don't learn their real names. You don't ask. The man who recruited you, you come to know him simply as Garrett, which you understand immediately is not his name, runs the orientation with the brisk efficiency of someone teaching a graduate seminar in a subject that has no textbook. Garrett explains the architecture plainly. The agency operates on a single operational principle. Everything it does must be deniable by everyone who authorized it. This is not a cover story. This is the actual design. The authorization chain terminates at a verbal instruction from someone who will never put their name in writing, passed to Garrett, passed to you. If anything goes wrong, the chain has no links. You are a contractor employed by a shell company registered in Delaware. The shell company is a client of a consulting firm in McLean, Virginia. The consulting firm has a website, a receptionist, and a LinkedIn page. The consulting firm has never, in any legal sense, done anything wrong. You are 3 layers of paperwork from any accountability, which means you are functionally nowhere. You ask Garrett who the clients are. He says the clients are people who understand that national security requires a category of action that can't survive institutional review. He says this with no visible discomfort. He's not rationalizing. He's describing an operational reality the way a mechanic describes a transmission. This is how it works. This is what the parts do. The why is above your clearance, and always will be. Your first operation is so small it barely qualifies. A city official in a country you're not supposed to be in is meeting with a delegation from a competing power's energy ministry. You are to observe, document, and report. Nothing else. You spend 11 days living inside the city in a cover identity so ordinary it functions like camouflage. A mid-level consultant for a European agricultural firm, which means you carry a laptop, attend 1 fabricated meeting per week, and are otherwise invisible. You photograph the official. You document the meetings. You submit the report through a dead-drop procedure that leaves no digital trace. The operation costs approximately $40,000. The information you return generates an intelligence assessment read by 9 people you'll never meet and influences a diplomatic decision that is never publicly explained. Nobody gets hurt. Nothing dramatic happens. You go in, you document, you leave. You feel, walking out of the airport on the return leg, almost exactly the way you felt completing a clean mission in Fallujah. The quiet satisfaction of a thing done precisely, without excess. You file the moral accounting in the drawer and come home. The second operation introduces an asset. Her name in your file is Cardinal. Her real name is Sheeran. She is 34 years old, a civil engineer employed by the National Infrastructure Ministry of a country in the Caucasus region. She is in contact with the agency because she has concerns about certain construction contracts, foreign financed, aggressively priced, built to specifications that give the financing government remote access to the infrastructure's own control systems. She is not a spy by temperament. She is a woman who found something disturbing in a technical document and followed it far enough to end up in a room with a person who works for an organization that doesn't exist. Your job is to run her, meet regularly, receive intelligence, assess reliability, keep her functional and motivated. Asset handling is a science with a specific moral architecture at its center. You need the asset to trust you completely, which requires giving them the impression that you reciprocate completely. You don't reciprocate completely. You can't, because every asset is also a liability, and a liability has to be managed, and management sometimes requires disposal. You know this going in. Sheeran does not. She is the best asset you ever run. Her access is extraordinary. Ministry-level documents, meeting notes, technical specifications representing the most comprehensive foreign penetration of a small sovereign government since the Cold War. In 18 months, she passes you material worth in intelligence terms more than the combined output of the agency's other 3 active operations in the region. Garrett tells you her material is being read at levels you'll never be cleared for. He tells you this as a compliment. You meet her every 3 weeks in a rotating series of locations, a cafe, a park, a bookshop whose proprietor doesn't ask questions. She is precise, careful, and increasingly frightened. Not because she suspects surveillance. She is too good a source to have been sloppy. She is frightened because of what she keeps seeing. The foreign infrastructure contracts are deeper than she initially reported. There are financial structures beneath them she can't fully read, but that point, in her assessment, toward a scenario where the government she works for becomes technically incapable of operating its own power grid independently of the financing country. She calls it a slow annexation. A country that can't turn its own lights on without asking permission isn't sovereign in any meaningful sense. She wants to know what the agency is going to do with the information she's providing. You tell her the information is being acted on at the highest levels. You tell her the work she's doing matters. Both things are probably true in the same way that a lot of things are probably true. You believe them when you say them, and you file the uncertainty in the drawer. She accepts it. She trusts you. She has to. On the 19th month, she passes you something different. Not infrastructure documents, financial records. Specifically, records from a consulting firm registered in the Cayman Islands that appears to be the beneficial owner of one of the foreign energy contracts. Traced back 3 layers, the consulting firm has a parent entity that has a parent entity that, in its ownership structure, includes a holding company managing assets for a group of American institutional investors. She has found, buried in the technical scaffolding of a foreign infrastructure takeover, an American financial fingerprint. She hands you the documents and she looks at you and she asks quietly whose interests the agency is actually protecting. You take the documents. You tell her you'll escalate them. You do escalate them. You log them as asset-generated material and submit through the standard channel, flagged for senior review. Garrett calls 2 days later. His voice is the same as always, measured, professional, the tone of someone discussing a scheduling conflict. He says the documents are under review. He says the source has begun exhibiting signs of scope expansion. That's the agency's language for an asset who is asking questions outside their operational mandate. He asks for your assessment of Cardinal's continued reliability. You know what the assessment is supposed to say. An asset who has started questioning the purpose of the operation is an asset who is becoming dangerous, not because of what they know, because of what they might decide to do with what they know. The operational logic is clean. You write the assessment. You use the phrase asset instability. You recommend a structured withdrawal, the agency's language for ending the relationship in a way that leaves the asset unable to connect their work to any organization that can be named or found. 6 months later, Shireen disappears. You are not told what happened. You do not ask. People in the agency don't press. You are 31 years old when Garrett brings you into what he calls the most important work the agency has done in a decade. The country is in the Maghreb region, a mid-sized nation with a functioning democracy, a reasonably free press, and a government that has, over the previous
previous 3 years, been consolidating control of its national resource extraction sector in a way that the agency's clients consider destabilizing. The government is not destabilizing in any way that would appear in a dictionary. It is nationalizing. It has passed legislation asserting state ownership over mineral extraction operations previously licensed to foreign companies. This is legal under international law.
It is, by most academic measures, a reasonable exercise of sovereign economic policy. The companies whose licenses are being nationalized are not academic. The mineral deposits in question are among the largest known reserves of rare earth elements on the continent, materials essential to battery production, semiconductor manufacturing, and the defense supply chains of every major power. Independent geological surveys value the recoverable deposits at between $800 billion and $1.1 trillion over a full extraction cycle. The nationalization legislation, if implemented, transfers approximately $40 billion in projected revenue away from 3 American companies over the next 40 years. Garrett's briefing uses none of those numbers. Garrett's briefing describes a government moving toward authoritarian consolidation, a security situation threatening regional stability, and a humanitarian forecast projecting significant civilian casualties if the political trajectory continues. He presents 3 intelligence assessments, all classified at levels you're not supposed to question, all pointing toward the same conclusion. The current government is a threat to regional stability. A window for managed transition is available if acted on within a specific time frame. Your role is what the agency calls political architecture, not violence. Violence is expensive, messy, and generates the kind of international attention that makes deniability impossible. Your role is to build the conditions under which a political transition happens naturally. You run a network of 6 local assets: journalists, academics, a mid-level military officer, a city council member, and you coordinate a disinformation campaign so precisely targeted that the government begins to appear, in its own citizens' eyes, to be failing on terms the government itself defined. Economic anxiety that was already present gets amplified. Political divisions that already existed get widened. A military officer's legitimate concern about procurement corruption, real corruption, actual corruption, you are not inventing this, gets broadcast through channels that make it appear more systemic than it is. You do not create the kindling, you arrange it. You provide the match. You stand at a very safe distance. The operation runs for 14 months. Your analytical work is, by every internal metric the agency uses, exceptional. 6 assets running simultaneously with 0 security compromises. The political environment in the target country shifts precisely according to Garrett's projected timeline. There is a moment in the 11th month when you sit in a hotel room in a city you are not supposed to be in and review the week's reporting and feel, genuinely, that you are good at this, not comfortable with it. You have not been comfortable with anything since Fallujah, but competent in the specific way that makes a person feel necessary. You are doing something difficult that requires real skill, and the skill is working. You file the moral accounting in the drawer. In month 14, the government falls, not through a coup that would be too visible, through a confidence crisis that was 3 years in the making and 14 months in the arranging. The Prime Minister resigns. The opposition coalition takes a parliamentary majority. International observers characterize the transition as messy but democratic. The New York Times runs a piece about the resilience of the country's civil institutions. Garrett calls and says 2 words: clean exit. You are back in the United States for 3 weeks when you meet Chen. Chen is 26 years old, 18 months out of the farm, assigned to your operations cell as an analyst. She is the sharpest junior analyst you have worked with, methodical, rigorous, genuinely excellent at source evaluation. She reminds you of yourself at her age in the specific way that things remind you of yourself when you are watching them make the mistake you already made. She is still asking the question you stopped asking. She asks it out loud in a debrief on a new operation while Garrett is in the room. She asks,
What's the end state here? Not in the procedural sense. She understands the operational endpoint. She means the other one. The one after the mission. What does the country look like in 5 years? Who benefits? What did we actually change? The room goes quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when someone has said something everyone knows, but nobody has been naming. Garrett looks at her the way he looked at you in Fallujah. Slow, deliberate, assessing. He says the end state is regional stability and the advancement of American interests. He says this as if reading from a document. She nods and writes it down, and you watch her write it down. And you know with the precision of someone who has already made this trip that she is in the part of the story where she still believes the document is describing something real. 2 weeks later, while reviewing archived reporting from the Maghreb operation for a post-operational analysis, you find something that Garrett's original briefing did not include: a geological survey commissioned 18 months before the operation began by a consulting firm whose ownership structure you recognize. 3 layers deep: a holding company, a parent entity, American institutional investors. The survey predates the intelligence assessments that justified the operation by 16 months.
The intelligence assessments described a government moving toward authoritarian consolidation. The geological survey described with extraordinary precision the location and estimated value of the rare earth deposits that same government was in the process of nationalizing. The survey was the first document. The intelligence assessments came after. The humanitarian forecast, the projected civilian casualties, the regional instability, the stability window, came after. The operation was built on top of the survey the way a building is built on top of a foundation. The survey is the reason the building exists. The building is the justification you were given. You ran 14 months of political architecture to protect a mineral contract worth $40 billion to 3 companies. The story you were told was that you were preventing a civil war. You were not preventing a civil war. You were enforcing a lease. And the documents Sheeran passed you, the Cayman Islands consulting firm, the American financial fingerprint buried in the foreign infrastructure contracts. They were pointing at the same structure from the other direction. She found the foundation. She showed it to you. You filed it as asset instability and wrote the burn assessment, and she disappeared 6 months later. And now you are sitting in a secure analysis room in a building in Northern Virginia looking at a geological survey that tells you what you actually did and who actually paid for it. The agency that doesn't exist cannot be held accountable for the things that didn't happen. The operation that was never sanctioned cannot be reviewed by a committee that was never briefed. The asset who was burned was never an asset because the agency that burned her doesn't have assets because it doesn't exist. The $47 million the operation cost, drawn through contractor invoices from the shell company, from the consulting firm, from the holding company, never existed as a budget line, which means it was never spent, which means nothing happened, which means you have nothing to report to anyone because there is no one to report to, because there is no mechanism by which the thing that happened can be named as a thing that happened. You think about Chen. You think about her writing down regional stability and the advancement of American interests with the careful penmanship of someone who still believes the words mean what they say. You think about telling her. You run the calculation the way you run every calculation, methodically, without sentiment. If you tell her, she will do what she is trained to do, which is escalated. Escalation goes to Garrett. Garrett will assess her the way he assessed Shiri. You will be asked for your evaluation of her reliability, and you already know what the phrase for someone who asks too many questions looks like in an assessment. You have written it yourself. You close the file. You sit with the quiet of the secure room for a long time. Outside this building, it is a Tuesday afternoon in Northern Virginia. People are driving home. People are picking up their
children from school. People are operating under the assumption that the government conducting foreign policy on their behalf is doing so in their name, in service of the values they were told they share. They are not wrong to believe this. The belief is the product. The product is what the operation was designed to protect, not the mineral contract, not the $40 billion over 40 years. Those are the payment. The product is the belief that the country is what it says it is, and the belief is the thing that cannot survive the document you just read. You put the survey back in the archive. You flag nothing. You note nothing. You become in that moment every person before you who read something they weren't supposed to understand and decided that the understanding was more dangerous than the ignorance. There is a long list of those people. Their names are not in any file you can access. Their names are in the drawer. Your father spent 14 months in Vietnam doing things that don't appear in any official record of that conflict. He came home with a hearing problem and a relationship with silence and 4 decades of waiting for paperwork that never fully resolved. He died at 61 of a pulmonary condition the VA classified as service adjacent, the government's language for "we know what caused this and we will not say it in writing." His benefits at time of death were $1,340 per month. The 3 companies whose mineral contracts you protected in the Maghreb operation reported combined revenues of $2.3 billion in the quarter your operation concluded. He said, "Come back whole." In the parking lot in Harlan, you have all your fingers. You have all your faculties. You are in excellent physical condition. You are as whole as a person can be who has spent a decade performing functions that cannot be named in any language the country uses to describe itself.
The agency that doesn't exist not because its work is classified. Classification is for things that exist in secret. The agency doesn't exist because a government that acknowledged it would have to explain what it's for. And a government that explains what it's for can no longer tell its people that what it's for is them. That's the architecture. That's the foundation no one is supposed to find. The work doesn't disappear because it's hidden. It disappears because if it were visible, the thing it was protecting would disappear with it. Not the country, not the people, not the democracy, just the story. The story the country tells itself about what it does and why and who it serves and whether those things are the same. You go home, you make dinner, you sit in the quiet of your apartment in a city you can't name, in a job you can't describe, for an organization that doesn't exist. And you think about a woman named Sheeran who found a financial fingerprint buried in a construction contract and handed it to you because she trusted you, and you wrote 2 words, asset instability, and she disappeared, and the mineral contracts were protected, and 3 companies reported strong earnings, and the story continued. The drawer is very full. You have been filing things in it for a long time. At some point, a drawer that full stops being a drawer and starts being the whole room.